live here on Jane Unchained Canada. So if anyone has, if they're recording live as well, submit some of your footage to Ray and maybe you can be on Jane Unchained live. I think that's it then. Okay, to business. Our first VEDTalker is the well-known rapper, Gaia.Is.I, Gaia.Is.I, however you... and he is fighting ignorance, saving animal lives, and shattering the myth that vegans are weak through his music, comedy, and clever commentary. And who says vegans are humorless with this guy around? His talk will center around politics and voting strategies being a crucial part of the fight to achieve animal liberation. Please welcome the very cool Gabriel Nadler.
Now, to read you guys the dictionary. Just got a really high-tech podium here. How's it going, everybody? Good. Thanks for having me. Now, before I begin, I just want to issue a trigger warning. What I'm going to say is going to upset a lot of people. Maybe not so much people in this room, but more so people of the InfoWars, alt-right variety. But then again, objective basic facts and grade 2 level science about the weather triggers them. So what are you going to do? And the warning is this. When I talk about vegan politics, when I talk about a connection between animal rights and politics, I'm talking about global politics. Sorry, I thought you just heard Alex Jones's head exploding somewhere. What do I mean by that? Are vegans planning to take over the world, break open all the cages, free the animals, and put a vegan cheeseburger in everyone's hand? Yes! That sounds pretty good. And what I mean by that practically is this. When toxic waste floats out of a smokestack in, say, Michigan, the kind of toxic waste that causes cancer and causes birth defects in humans and every species of animal. The toxic waste doesn't just float out of the smokestack, go over Detroit, and get to the border in Windsor, and then be like, oh shit. Oh, I forgot my passport. Oh, man. Oh, and this damn libtard government in Canada is phasing out coal pollution, and now they're taxing carbon emissions. Probably won't even let me in if I get my passport. Oh well, better go back to the only poisoned American citizens who voted for a pro-toxic waste president. They asked for it. No, of course not. It's air pollution. It goes everywhere. Same thing with water pollution. It will affect everything around it. And despite the fact that humans have created artificial borders all around the world, we still live on a planet. So anything of any real significance that happens anywhere is going to affect life everywhere. And when we speak about animals, I'm talking about beings that have no rights anywhere. Where we live, in this country, I mean, endangered species have some kind of basic protections, but often you can still shoot them and trap them in just limited numbers. Farm animals have allowable amounts of torture, but I don't think that's a meaningful form of rights. So I'm going to be speaking about politics in multiple countries today, but primarily the United States and Canada, because those are two countries I know. I know what's happening in to a larger degree. But what I'm going to say also applies to anyone who lives in a democracy anywhere in the world. And I just want to give a special notice, people watching us on the internet who live in the United Kingdom specifically. Because the UK has an election coming up this year, and here in Canada we've copied your electoral system, the parliamentary democracy. We also have a multi-party system. So a lot of what I'm going to say would apply to the UK, but I'm not as familiar with British politics. So I'd love if people were to share their ideas on how the British animal rights movement, which is massive, it's approaching 10% of the population, vegans in the UK, not even including vegetarians, can have a cohesive strategy to make a difference because the Brexit election is on its way. So let's get started. Get a quick sip of water. So, what would you say if I told you that there was an event that took place that resulted in the deaths of literally tens of millions of animals? Horrible, slow, agonizing deaths through poisoning, through torture, through killing, that resulted in the extinction of endangered species. An event that was so destructive that it actually accelerated the rate of climate change, and with it, the rate of mass extinction of animal species on this planet. And that there are vegans who say that, no. Events like that, no, we shouldn't get involved with that. Too controversial, it just makes people mad, people get too emotional, just focus on veganism. What? Isn't that exactly what vegans are supposed to talk about? Since when do we care if people get emotional and something is controversial? Like, we don't melt a whole bunch of snowflakes when we talk about bacon. That's extremely controversial to a lot of people. We don't care. No, as animal rights actors, we're just supposed to tell the truth and fight for animals, period. The event that I'm talking about, I wish it was fictional, but it was a real event, and it took place on November 8th, 2016. And it was the illegitimate election of a science-denying, self-admitted serial molester, Nazi, and KKK apologist as president of the United States. And I say illegitimate for two reasons. Not just because now we have objective facts to show that the dictator of Russia engaged in a massive attack on American democracy to put that candidate in the White House successfully. And as president, that candidate has completely reshaped American foreign policy to benefit that dictator. But I say illegitimate even more so because the United States is not a democracy. Because somebody else won that election by 3 million votes. But the United States has a system called the Electoral College, which is a relic of the slavery era, which was specifically designed to reinforce the system of slavery during that era. And tragically, the KKK's favorite candidate won the Electoral College. That's all really depressing. We all know about that. So let me switch it up and talk about some good news. Some really good news. Vegans are a lot closer than you may think to achieving our dream that we talked about earlier, breaking open the cages and permanently shutting down the slaughterhouses. A lot closer. I know that there's going to be talk today that's going to talk about achieving a vegan planet in 60 years. And I don't know about a vegan planet. It may take that long, but I think within the next 10 years, this coming decade, we're going to start seeing the first vegan nations, the first countries who will outlaw animal slaughter. How? How do we get there? Now, I think we're a lot... now, in order to close down the slaughterhouses, we do not need 100% of the population to stop eating animals and agree that it's wrong to stab animals to death for no reason other than to give yourself cancer. We don't need 100% of the population to get there. In any democracy, you need 50.1%. That's it. When we get that, if we are politically organized, we can shut down the slaughterhouses. And we're a lot closer to there than you may think. In many countries, Canada, for example, vegans and vegetarians combined are close to 10% of the population. The vegetarians, I know we're hard on them a lot, and we want them to go vegan, but most of them, I think, just are not familiar yet with the atrocities of the dairy and egg industries, or they don't have the willpower yet to go vegan. They haven't been exposed to the awesome cheese, to the awesome egg alternatives, but they're certainly not going to stand in the way of shutting down the slaughterhouses if we were organized. Now, at 10% of the population, each of us only needs to reach 4 people. 4 people to get to 50%. That's not really that hard. And in recent years, our numbers have been expanding exponentially. And we have every reason to think that's not going to slow down as time goes by. That's going to speed up because our numbers were expanding exponentially before Beyond Meat became available in every grocery store and fast food chain. And that's only the United States. It's just happening in Canada. It's about to happen in the rest of the world. After Beyond Meat, there's going to be 10 similar things that taste exactly the same or better than a dead cow or a dead pig, etc. These things happened before a movie that is going to come out, that is about to come out, that is about to make it common knowledge that a plant-based diet is the diet for men who care about the health of the organ that men generally care about the most. I'm talking about the Game Changers. And if you're lucky enough to see an advanced copy of it, you know. If you haven't seen it, you probably heard about this scene. And I am not joking. This one scene in the movie, the rest of the film is a powerhouse, but this one scene is going to make men around the world run for the veggie burgers, purely based on sexual health. And let's be honest, people are selfish, and that is going to be a powerful force. So with this happening, I don't think it's going to be very long, just a matter of years before we're approaching 25% of the population. Once you get to 25% of the population, each of us just needs to reach one person, and we're the majority. And you also have social factors when you get to a critical mass. If you have, veganism is really popular within the millennial demographic. So you have a group of friends and 3 out of 5 of them are vegan, 4 out of 5 of them are vegan. It's going to become like the one friend who's still kind of racist or homophobic. Like, what? You still kill animals? Like, come on, man. Like, try to eat this burger. So you're going to have those social pressures building up as well. And once we get to 51%, we could shut down the slaughterhouses immediately. Either the next election, or if we're really politically organized, we don't even wait for an election. We demand a referendum take place, and if we're 51%, we know how that referendum ends. And can you imagine what a beautiful day that's going to be? We're going to need a lot more sanctuaries. So here's some even better news. We don't need to wait till we're the majority of the population to make enormous progress for animals and save literally billions of lives the way that President Obama did, which I'm going to touch on soon, in order to make an enormous difference. Long before the majority of people agree to outlaw animal slaughter, there's going to be a lot of things that the majority of people agree is wrong that we can outlaw along the way. For example, never mind the majority of people, the majority of hunters think that trophy hunting endangered species is wrong. So why is it still legal? Because we're not organized. We could outlaw it tomorrow. Why is it legal to shoot endangered elephants and lions and wolves? It should not be legal, and yet it is. The majority of people are against animal testing for cosmetics purposes. Lo and behold, thanks to some awesome, organized, politically active vegans, it's become illegal in many European countries. I believe the entire European Union, Israel, California is doing it. California really has leverage over the entire United States, so California is effectively going to make it illegal in the US. Canada's along the way. Many European nations have completely shut down their fur industries. The last fur farm in Germany shut down last week. California is now on the path to outlawing the entire fur industry. But I need to offer some caution here. Before we get too optimistic, because even if we say we double to about 12% of the population, Canada, the US, we're about 6% right now. Sorry, that was last year. We're probably more than that right now. But say we double. No matter how many petitions we sign, no matter how many of us call our MP or congressman, it's not necessarily going to make any difference if the wrong government is in power. Because certain governments are just purely in the pocket of animal agriculture and fossil fuel industry. Try and email Donald Trump. Hey, Trump, stop mass murdering animals. Yeah, good luck with that, you know. Whereas someone like Trudeau, who is, you know, we all know he's done a lot of bad things, he's done a lot of good things. But are we going to be able to influence him? Probably, yeah. I would say definitely, yeah, actually. So who the government is really makes a massive difference. And that's where our impression in elections comes up. But we're still a minority. You know, we can't just choose a government like that. So how does a minority flex its political muscle to make an outsized difference? This is called physics. It's called throwing our weight around. It's called tipping the balance in the scales in favor of the party that is most likely to be open to our rational and reasonable ideas. And so who is that party going to be? Are we going right or are we going left? So let's look at the United States first, and then we'll finish it off with Canada because we have an election here, so I really want to talk about that. So in the United States, let me give you a spoiler alert. Animal agriculture has already picked sides. Fossil fuel industry has already picked sides. The NRA and hunting organizations have already picked sides. They've chosen the Republican Party. They vote for the Republican Party. They pour money into the Republican Party, and they mobilize voters for the Republican parties. Vegans, meanwhile, by and large, with exceptions, but by and large, sit on our asses, on the sidelines, complain about the Democratic Party and how they're not perfect, and despite all the billions of animals' lives they've saved, which I'll get into in a second, our voter turnout is disgustingly horrible. But if you're still unconvinced about which side that we should be on, let me give you a few highlights of Donald Trump's presidency up to the moment. So since 2016, he has made it legal to shoot and gas hibernating baby bears and their mothers in their dens, to shoot and gas nursing wolf puppies and their mothers in their dens in wildlife refuges. He lifted a ban on the use of lead ammunition on public lands that will result in a slow and agonizing death from lead poisoning of approximately 10 to 20 million animals a year. That ban was put in place by President Obama. He's lifted a ban on the use of pesticides that have been scientifically conclusively proven to cause birth defects in babies. They only did experiments with humans, but you can imagine what it does to the animals that live in the farmlands and live downstream as well. That ban was put in place by President Obama. He's pumping millions of pounds of arsenic, lead, and mercury into our rivers, lakes, and bloodstreams from coal ash toxic waste ponds from coal industry. We are on the Great Lakes right now, so I say we, because Canada and America, we breathe the same air, we drink the same water. He also canceled Obama's clean power plan, which would have kept 870 megatons, that's 870 million tons of planet-destroying poisonous greenhouse gases out of the atmosphere, equivalent to taking 166 million cars off the road. I like that they measure greenhouse gas in megatons the way we measure the impact of nuclear bombs, because the destructive force on the planet due to climate change is similar. He's opened up all 3 of America's oceans to oil extraction, a process that is preceded by something called seismic blasting. What seismic blasting is, they send ships to map the ocean floor using massively powerful sound waves of the sort that rupture the eardrums of whales and dolphins and terrorize them so badly that they will often kill themselves, surfacing in desperation to escape the sound, or beach themselves and kill themselves in order to escape the light. And that's just whales and dolphins. It affects all ocean life. And of course, if you actually find oil, it's followed by digging an oil well, which will always spill, oil tankers, which will always spill and disturb ocean life, and then burning the gas into the atmosphere. He's attacked endangered species protection across America and the world, from what has been called a war on wolves in the United States, to allowing the trophy hunting of lions and elephants that Obama stopped in Africa, to defunding the U.S. Wildlife Agency's efforts to protect iconic species like tigers and rhinos. He's building a massive wall along the U.S.-Mexican border straight through the habitat of 111 endangered species. And he's prevented over 25 species from being added to the endangered species list, who are currently experiencing population crashes due to global warming. These are Arctic species because he thinks, climate change is a hoax. He's accelerated the pace on the slaughter floor of animals, accelerating the pace of killing animals. He's put a factory farm advocate and anti-animal rights advocate in charge of the Department of Agriculture, and literally dozens of other actions that I can't, I could do this to be my entire speech, but I just talked about that accelerate suffering, death for animals and people, and accelerate the pace of mass extinction. What about Obama? Before I get too depressed, let me just remind you that pretty much everything I just said was Trump reversing something that Obama did to protect animals. In addition to that, President Obama protected 553 million acres of earth and ocean as marine protected areas, or what are called national monuments, essentially national parks, that without exaggeration saved the lives of billions of animals. Just one national park, one marine protected area around Hawaii is double the area of Ontario. Has anyone here driven to Thunder Bay? Right? It takes 20 hours and you're still in Ontario. And that's just a straight line in one direction. We're talking about the entire area of Ontario, double that. This is one marine protected area. Obama just decided one day, I'm creating this in the Pacific Ocean. Banned industrial fishing, banned oil extraction, banned mining. That one action probably saved the lives of billions of marine animals, in addition to whales and dolphins as well. Obama also made the biggest cuts of greenhouse gas emissions in human history. The clean power plan that Trump canceled, as well as doubling the fuel efficiency of American vehicles. Sadly, Trump canceled that as well. I'm sorry that pisses you off, but you really should be pissed off. And Americans watching this, you really should be pissed off. And if you stayed home on election day or you voted for the Green Party, you should be pissed off at yourself. Sorry. Okay, and sorry, I should emphasize that point. In America, it's not that there's not too many vegans who are misinformed enough to vote Republican. It's approximately 4%. There has been surveys. Our main problem is not Republican vegans. There's very few of them. That is a problem. Our main problem is non-voters and the Green Party. It's people who have absolutely no rational ability to see the consequences of their vote, who are so delusional, they think the entire country is going to choose either this person or this person, but I'm just going to burn my ballot and vote for this person, make a statement. I'm sorry. Animals' throats are getting slit. They're going extinct. They're dying in mass numbers. They don't have time for us to make BS statements, okay? Democrats or Republicans are going to win. When I say we need to throw our weight behind someone, if we support the Democratic Party, there's 20 million vegans in the United States. And these vegans are concentrated in the millennial demographic, as in the youngest people who don't vote. So they're naturally left-wing. They're naturally Democrats. They just have this ignorant idea that is all too common. Both political parties are the same. I think I destroyed that idea pretty thoroughly now, and I'm just talking about animals. We could talk about healthcare. We could talk about anything. Massive differences between the parties. There's some areas where you could see some overlap, but there's a mass extinction of a difference. So young people really just need that bit of information to be mobilized to vote. But if they did that, there's enough of us in every swing state in America, we could destroy the Republicans every single time. If we were the reason that Democrats won every single election, and I'm talking about presidential, I'm talking about Senate elections, congressional, and local elections as well. The animal rights movement is reinforcing you and you're smashing Republicans. They are going to listen to us, okay? The other constituencies in the Democratic Party have a powerful voice. Policies get enacted when Democrats control the government because those constituencies help the Democrats win. If we help them win and we have a coherent list of demands, say we want to cut subsidies to animal agriculture, we want to outlaw all these forms of animal torture, and be reasonable because we know we're not going to have closed slaughterhouses yet, but there's a hell of a lot of other things we can do first that Americans are going to agree with, and certainly Democrats are going to agree with. I lived in the United States for 2 years. For anyone who's sitting there writing, oh, why are you talking about American politics? I lived there for 2 years. I'm still paying taxes to the U.S. because I'm working by proxy for an American company. That doesn't even matter because, like I said, we breathe the same air and water. But having spoken to a lot of Democrats in the States, a grand total of 0 opposition to veganism. My experience was when I talk about veganism, they're just they seem embarrassed that they're not vegan yet, and they just start bragging about, oh, I tried this Beyond Burger, I tried this. Like, they're already on the way. And that's another important point. When we get involved in political parties, we can help the entire party change, we can help government policy change, you can also do grassroots activism. You can also talk to people one by one. Go to a Democratic Party meeting, bring cookies, bring Beyond Burgers, and say, hey, I'm here, I care about healthcare, I care about all these other issues, I also care about animals, try these cookies. It's going to be quite effective. So, finally, let's talk about Canada, because that's where we are. Canada is more complicated than the US in some ways because we have a multi-party system. But one thing is clear to us, should be very clear. Out of the 5 political parties, and I'm including the Bloc Québécois, the Conservatives are the absolute worst for animals. So there's no question your vegan voting Conservatives makes as much sense as buying a Canada Goose jacket because you're voting to kill animals. You're voting for the worst possible option. Veganism is defined as making the best available possible practical option. Conservatives is the worst option, so hell no to them, okay? But who do we actually support? That's the complicated question in Canada. But maybe it's simpler than we think. Because we're looking at an election now. Again, we're still only 6%. We're not going to choose the next prime minister. But we can maybe help which direction it goes. The next prime minister of Canada is either going to be Justin Trudeau re-elected or this clown from the Conservative Party, what's his name, Andrew Scheer, who is running on a campaign of abolishing the carbon tax. Now, I know a lot of us are probably familiar with the bad things Justin Trudeau has done. Which we should be, because we raise awareness about it. He supports the dog fur industry. He supports the seal hunt. I'm not going to mention the bad things that are just a continuation of previous policies, because I tend to judge politicians on what they changed. Because politicians aren't gods. They change certain things in government. As far as the positive things that Justin Trudeau has done, we all know he's changed the food guide to be almost completely vegan. So that's fantastic. Even more important, I would argue, is subsidizing Beyond Meat, or vegan meat, to the tune of $150 million. If you doubt how powerful that is, just bear in mind that the meat industry is losing their minds about the fact that we even call it meat, which, by the way, we need to call it meat if we're appealing to people, because they can see what a threat it possesses. They're mad that we're calling plant-based milk milk, because they can see what a threat that poses. So even though Justin Trudeau has not canceled the subsidies for animal agriculture, helping plant-based meat with $150 million is going to do a hell of a lot of damage, just like changing the food guide is. It's fantastic. He's changed it so that marine protected areas are now off limits to oil drilling and mining. What the hell? You used to be able to drill for oil in marine protected areas? Apparently, Trudeau has gotten rid of that. He's phasing out coal power in Canada. I can't emphasize how massive that is. Coal is, there's disputes over whether animal agriculture or electricity is number one cause of global warming. Either way, electricity generation is horrible, and it's because of coal. Coal is causing global warming, and it's poisoning the hell out of us on a daily basis. He's getting rid of it in Canada, and like I said, that's massively important. And perhaps the most important thing, according to economists, in reducing greenhouse gas emissions is a carbon tax. He's implemented a carbon tax in Canada. I'd like to see it double what it is, but come on, he's moving in the right direction. So let's be realistic what our strategy is here. I call it ABC. I didn't invent this. Anyone but conservative. It doesn't mean we just automatically support the Liberal Party. It means that your strategy is going to depend on what riding you live in. Our main goal is to keep the conservatives from forming a government. So if you live in a riding where the best opposition to them is NDP, then help the NDP. If you live in the best opposition is Green, awesome, because Greens are the most progressive for animals. If it's the Bloc Québécois, I don't really care that they're pretending that Quebec's not going to separate, and the Bloc Québécois is environmentally a lot more progressive than the Conservatives. So anyone but them. But in most of Canada, it's going to be the Liberal Party. So if you're going to help the Liberal Party defeat the Conservatives, don't do it for nothing. Get involved with them. Tell them why you're there. Say, I'm here, we do agree on healthcare and X, Y, and Z. Are you saying Z in the States? But we also care about animals, and like I said, bring food with you, and then I think we can make a massive difference. And also, here's the one good thing I'll say about Justin Trudeau. It's not about his morals. It's about the fact that he uses social media. He is paying attention to Instagram and Facebook. So if we have a concerted campaign to appeal to him and say, hey, Trudeau, we don't like the fact that you support dog fur. We don't like the fact that you're clubbing baby seals to death and you're still subsidizing that. But we recognize we're rational people. We recognize the Conservatives are worse. They're going to do all the bad things you do and none of the good things. So we're just going to back you up this one time. But we want proportional representation like you promised us. So we could have vegan MPs elected. We want you to end subsidies for animal agriculture. And as far as the other demands, I really would encourage everyone to follow Nation Rising on Instagram, Facebook, whatever it is you use. Because Nation Rising is really compiling what are the realistic things that we can go for. And that's what, I keep talking about us being politically organized. I can't do that all by myself. So I would like to connect people to that. And the Animal Alliance Party of Canada as well. Unlike the Green Party in the US, which is completely irrational and delusional and thinks that they're going to win an election magically with 0.whatever% of the vote, Animal Alliance Party Canada is realistic. They know they're not going to win. So I've talked to people in the party, they're completely behind strategic voting because they recognize that animals have a life and death. 3,000 animals a second are getting slaughtered to death. So that's all I have to say. Thank you very much. Let's get organized. And
Okay, well, thank you for the talk and the high-class podium here. Thanks, Gabe. Okay, our next VEDTalker is the co-host of the Sizzling-Hot, the Live Vegan podcast. He's also here with Vegan Nation, and they've got a nice little pile of merch there if people want to have a look and see what they have. He will be sharing some of the background of his work as a factory farm and slaughterhouse undercover investigator, and will also instill in us some hope through his presentation 2079, a chronology of how slaughtering animals will become illegal over the next 60 years. Please welcome Kevin Leahy, no relation to Mr. Leahy of Kowalchuk.
We have to talk afterwards. There will be a lot of overlap in what was just said in that last speech. First of all, thank you for inviting me to speak, and thank you all for being here. Thank you for your time. Hi, Kat. My daughter's in the back. If you want to come up and join me, you can. When I was 8 years old, I was infatuated with comic books. So much so that I created my own comic book series. And on the front cover was a comic book hero with a really cool outfit and a giant sword and a cape, and he could fly, and he had a sidekick dog named Rex. I also had a dog named Rex. And on his chest were the letters A.P., Animal Protector. And his arch nemesis also had two letters on his chest, A.K., which was Animal Killer. And Animal Killer would come up with all these creative ways to kill animals, and Animal Protector would jump in at the last moment and thwart his efforts, and they would fight, and Animal Protector was the hero, so obviously he would win. Fast forward a couple of years, I'm now 16 years old, and I'm standing in the woods next to a beautiful, majestic deer, an 8-point buck, this huge rack. And he was bleeding to death on the forest floor because I had just shot him with my .30-30 rifle. And in that moment of despair and suffering and near death, the overwhelming emotion that deer felt was confusion was bewilderment. He had an insatiable curiosity. There was something about this deer where he had to know what had just happened. So he lifted his head with all he could, and he looked me straight in the eyes, and I swear he talked to me in any way that an animal can talk without using the human language. And he said, "What just happened?" I said, "I shot you with my gun." And he said, "Why?" I said, "I don't know. I didn't have a good reason." So I shot him again because I wanted to put him out of his misery, the misery that I had just inflicted upon him. And something happened when he died. That insatiable curiosity left his body and entered mine. And I thought about it again and again and again. Why? Why did I kill that animal? Why did I kill so many animals up to that point in time? I had answers. I could bring the meat back to my family and they could eat it, but they didn't really like wild game meat. They liked the supermarket stuff, as did I. I didn't even want to eat it. I didn't want to kill the animal. That wasn't the reason I killed them. I liked nature. I liked being out in nature and experiencing the adventure of it all, but I didn't like killing. So why did I kill him? The only reason I could come up with was I wanted to make my father proud of me. See, my father was a hunter, and his friends were hunters. And I wanted his friends to be proud of him for what I did, and I wanted my father to be proud of me. And in that moment, I realized I had become my childhood superhero's arch nemesis. Fast forward a couple more years, and now I'm in South Korea. I'm teaching English to Korean kids. And that insatiable curiosity is still with me, and I'm still asking again and again, why are we doing these things to animals? And eventually I figured out that I should be vegan, and I kept animals off my plate. But there was something about being in Korea. There was something about the dogs that got to me. See, I grew up with dogs. They slept in my bed. I gave them hugs and cuddles and kisses and treats. And Christmas presents and birthday presents. Who's my best friend? Man's best friend. Why would Koreans kill dogs, I thought? This insatiable curiosity. I had to find out why. Why? So I researched and I found a video of a dog being slaughtered. And I became very emotional. I cried in that moment. And in my head, I said out loud, I said, I'm going to do something about this. I didn't know what I was going to do, but I knew I was going to do something. How audacious of me to say that now, I think, so many years ago. A white guy with blue eyes. I don't know the Korean language. I don't know the Korean culture. I don't know the Korean heritage. And I'm going to do something about that? How am I going to change their behavior? What the hell was I thinking? But I didn't care about that. The insatiable curiosity drove me forward. I was motivated. I had to know. So I became an undercover investigator in the Korean dog meat industry. And I will admit, before I met Mr. Il-san, I vilified him. He was a monster. He was a supervillain. See, Mr. Il-san was the first person I had ever met who killed dogs for a living. He owned 2 dog meat slaughterhouses, 2 dog meat farms, and 2 dog meat restaurants. And he wasn't the business suit type that kept himself clean. He had blood on his sleeves. He actually did the killing himself. And so when I met him, I thought, I'm gonna meet a supervillain. But I didn't. And when I first met him, I was taken back by how gracious he was, by how generous he was, by how kind and innocent he was. He grabbed my hand with 2 hands and he said, what can I get for you? Please sit down. I'm gonna get you something to eat. And we smoked cigarettes together, we drank beer together, we went to karaoke together. We became friends. I got to know Mr. Il-san on a personal level. And I found out that Mr. Il-san had dreams, he had aspirations, he had goals, he wanted to do things. He did not want to become a dog meat entrepreneur. But he did it to make his family proud. that was something I could relate with. Fast forward a couple more years, and now I'm in rural USA, still an undercover investigator working in pig farms. Particular pig farm, there were thousands of sows, which are pregnant mothers, trapped in gestation crates, and they're impregnated again and again and again and again against their will. And their babies are taken away from them. And their babies at a young age have their ears tattooed and their teeth clipped with pliers and their tails cut off with hot blades. And the males are castrated, all of this without anesthesia. And then the insatiable curiosity kept at me. Why? Why are we doing this? By the way, I hope every male in the room heard what I just said. Castration without anesthesia. It's cutting your balls off without painkillers. Can you imagine? Who would do that? Who would do that to baby animals? Why do we do this to baby animals? There are reasons, if you're interested. It's cheaper. That's why we don't use painkillers. And we cut the balls off because it makes the meat taste a certain way. And it also makes them less aggressive so they don't fight in overcrowded conditions. So those are answers. They're not good answers, but they're answers. But my next question was, who would do this? Why would someone do this for 8 hours a day, 40 hours a week? Who would do this for a living, castrate piglets? Frankie would. Frankie was a Mexican guy, a little bit shorter than me, a little bit younger than me, much bigger, chubby cheeks, and an awesome smile. He was the coolest. Super funny, super generous, and a hard worker, the most hardworking person I've ever met in my life. Always came to work on time, always stayed late, always did whatever the boss asked him to do, and never complained. And so I sat next to Frankie at lunch. I wanted to get to know him. And we talked about TV shows and movies and comic books. He liked a lot of things that I liked, and I liked him. So we went and played basketball together outside of the farm. We became friends, in as much as you can become friends as an undercover investigator. He didn't know what I was doing, but I found out that Frankie had a 2-year-old baby and a wife who couldn't yet work in America, and a family back in Mexico. And guess what? He wanted to make his family proud. So I give you guys these 3 examples, myself, Mr. Ilsan, and Frankie, because to me they represent the hundreds of people that I met in 3+ years of working undercover in factory farms all over the world. I worked with convicted felons who wore ankle bracelets in slaughterhouses. And never once, not one time did I ever meet a person who killed animals because they like to kill animals. To me, that speaks volumes about humanity. I'm not saying those people don't exist, by the way. I know they're out there. I know there are sadistic people who kill for the sake of killing, or who torture for the sake of torturing. I know they're out there. I'm just saying I never met one. And to me, that speaks a lot about humanity, about our species. Despite the atrocities we commit on a day-to-day basis, we are good. And so that's why I'm an eternal optimist, and that's why I think about the future, and I think that we will have a ban on slaughterhouses within my lifetime. And I say that all the time, and people say, what do you think, you're immortal? No. I'm going to give you guys a timeline. 60 years from today, 2079. And here's how it's going to happen. First, I'm going to take a glass. This is where I thought you were going to go. I'm not sure if you're aware. 46% of people right now, 46% are already in support of a ban on slaughterhouses. Shake your head. No way. Not possible. That's what the meat industry said. They were like, no way, that's not true. So you know what the meat industry did? They went out and hired their own firm to conduct another study to confirm or deny whether that was true. And guess what happened? 46%. Exactly the same number. We're only 5% away from a majority now. Imagine swaying 5% of the vote in the next 60 years. This is definitely possible. And so the same insatiable curiosity that led me to ask why we kill animals, because I eventually settled on we want to eat animals, led me to ask the next question, why do we eat animals? Taste, price, and convenience. Those are the three biggest answers. There are other answers, but those are the big three. And killing animals is not even on the list. So if we can offer two alternatives, any alternatives, to taste, price, and convenience, we can say goodbye to traditional meat. So I want you to think of the supermarket shelf now as it exists. You go to a supermarket shelf, it is all traditional meat. I define traditional meat as growing a baby to slaughtering the baby, then taking the meat off of her body and putting it on the supermarket shelf. But pretty soon, within the next 5 to 10 years, we are going to have three options: clean meat, traditional meat, and plant-based meat. And so I'm going to talk about clean meat first, then plant-based meat. And I know that clean meat is not technically vegan, but it does not involve the slaughter of an animal. So what you do is you take a couple of starter cells from you can take it from a human if you want, that would be the most consensual, and put it in a petri dish, and you add vitamins and minerals to it. Just let it grow. You can create billions of tons of meat with just those few starter cells. So, because you're just growing meat, it's a much more environmentally friendly and efficient process. And if you look at traditional meat, the way that they grow animals now, you have to grow the brains, the bones, the blood, the cartilage, the hair, the hooves, the teeth, all the things that we don't need or don't eat. So it's a much more inefficient process. But when we're talking about clean meat, it's way more efficient because you're just growing the meat. I understand it's not cost effective yet, but we will get there. But not only that, we'll be able to offer consumers a much better experience. A better experience. Because it's not just beef, pork, and chicken. Literally, they will have access to every animal on the planet. You'll be able to order on AmazonPrime.ca, and a little drone will bring you starter cells in your hand, and you can put it into your clean meat machine, which is on your counter next to your microwave. Push a button, and out pops a steak a few hours later. And not just a single protein steak, a blended steak with ox, pheasant, bison, elk, whatever. Let your imagination run wild. We'll be able to provide something that's not just as good as, but better than. Same with plant-based meat. I know there's a few exceptions to what I'm going to say right now, but for the most part, all of the plant-based meat that exists from 1970s till now has been cultivated by 3 plants: soy, wheat, and peas. And peas are new to the party. Beyond Meat and Impossible Foods brought peas, so yay, great, we got another one. There are more than 80,000 edible plant species on planet Earth that we know about. 80,000. So imagine the flavors, textures, and tastes that are waiting for us to discover. Imagine the artistic creations that plant-based chefs have yet to discover and provide. And because it's plant-based meat, it will be inherently more efficient and more environmentally friendly, of course, and healthier. And so if you look at the supermarket shelf again, we have 3 options within the category of meat: clean meat, traditional meat, and plant-based meat. And remember why we eat meat: taste, price, and convenience. And I argue that these 2 categories will offer something that is just as tasty or tastier than traditional meat. It will be just as cheap or cheaper than traditional meat, and it will be as convenient or more convenient than traditional meat. And so the question is, who's going to choose that middle category? And I've thought a lot about this. Insatiable curiosity, I keep thinking, who would choose that middle category? The only reason I can come up with is people like to kill animals? We don't, though. That's what I've been trying to say. That's not the reason. And so I predict when we get to that point, if you guys haven't heard me say this before, every meal is a vote. And I don't think capitalism's going anywhere anytime soon. Maybe sad to say. I think corporate power and lobbying power are here to stay for at least the next 100 years. And so, because each consumer spends $2,641 US per year on food, you get to choose which category that money should go into. Every meal's a vote. Every time you sit down to eat, you cast a ballot, right? That's more than 1,000 ballots a year. And so as these two categories get more money, they get more corporate strength. They get more lobbying power. And they will be able to loosen the government subsidies that are on traditional meat now. That's what makes it so cheap. And we'll also be able to implement a sin tax on traditional meat, just like we've done with cigarettes. So the middle category is going to go up in price, while the two categories on the sides will go down. This is all going to benefit us. So I'm not saying it's going to be easy. I know we have a long road to go. There's going to be a lot of obstacles. But I want to leave you guys with just a hypothetical. Say you're walking down the street and you see a man punching a child. That man is bigger than you. What do? What do you say? I have a 5-year-old daughter, and I hope and pray that all of you would say at least something. At least say something. Because it doesn't matter if it's his kid, it doesn't matter what the kid did beforehand, because kids are innocent. They're vulnerable, they're trusting, and they're loving. That's what it means to be a kid. It's the same with animals. They're innocent, they're vulnerable, they're trusting, and they're loving. There are no supervillains in this world, just like there are no superheroes. I know Avengers is big this weekend. But superhero or Superman's not real, Batman's a fake, Iron Man is just an idea. But what is real are the moments that we have. The moments where you get to choose to speak up or to say something and do something. And I think collectively, if we are courageous enough to make the right decision in those moments, we will be able to make that middle category obsolete. And that's how we get a slaughter-free world by 2079. Thank you.
Another good one. Thank you. Okay, our final VEDTalker is the content creator behind the cerebral and wildly popular Ask Yourself YouTube channel and occasional mentor for Joey Armstrong. He will be discussing good argumentation and how critical it is that we sharpen our skills when speaking up for animals to make us more effective activists. Listen how to make the ethical case for veganism in a persuasive way, and then challenge them with objections to see your new skills in action. Please welcome Isaac Brown.
I'm gonna move your little dictionary podium here. If that's okay. Cute little doggy. Don't want you to be slaughtered in China. Well, it's great to be invited to talk here to all you people. It's nice to have a room listening. You know, it's weird. I talk normally, I guess, to a few thousand people at once, but it's more intimidating when there's just a smaller group in an actual room. All right. So I decided that the best thing to talk about would be how to argue the ethical case for veganism persuasively. So a lot of people come to veganism, and I think, you know, what is the primary thing that someone would want to know, or at least that I would want to know, maybe you're not all like me, if I were fresh to veganism? And the answer to that is basically how to make the ethical case effectively. So there's a lot of bad arguments, and if any of you, use any of these arguments, I'm sorry for ripping on them. So one example would be, you should go vegan because it's natural. Like, setting aside the question of whether it's a natural diet or not, I see you laughing at someone right now. Setting aside the question of whether that's like an empirically true thing, right? Just appealing to nature would be a pretty terrible argument. Anyone who's like done a little philosophy, you probably know, like, there's a lot of bad things in nature, there's a lot of good things in nature, so we can't really, look to nature to determine what is ethical. That would be a bad move. It would probably set us up with kind of bad standard. There's other cases that people make. This one's really popular, so I hate to rip on it. There's a case that says that eliminating unnecessary suffering is a good thing to do, so we want to go vegan for that reason. But if you actually think about what's really being said there in detail, it lands nicely when you first hear it. You think, yeah, unnecessary suffering. I mean, that's clearly a bad thing. I don't like that. But then you think about it, and there's tons of unnecessary suffering that's involved in life. What exactly is unnecessary, right? Unnecessary, that kind of implies that there's some kind of goal there. Necessary for what? Necessary for life? Are we going to advocate a standard where the only things that are morally justified are those things that are essential for life? I mean, put away your camera and your phone and all these things, right? We'd be talking about getting rid of most of modern civilization if we're going to say something like that. So, it's probably not the most persuasive case to make. What's another bad argument that we get a lot of? All lives are equal. It's a pretty horrible one. I mean, do you really think that you're going to persuade a carnist if you're sitting there and saying that if it comes down to slaughtering a human or a mosquito, you should flip a coin? I mean, I understand that's like a romantic notion, like we should care about, we should care about everything equally, but when you actually think about how that would really play out, if we were to actually implement that as an ethical system, it would be just insane. I mean, does anyone actually think that if it's a choice of killing a human or a fly, you should flip a coin? I am not for swatting the fly for no reason, but I certainly think that we want to acknowledge a kind of hierarchy of value that has to do with how much well-being being can experience. So I would kind of ask, how would we go about making a good case for veganism? Well, what would the good case be? Well, there might be a problem sort of with that question right from the get-go. It implies that there is, kind of one good case, right? There could theoretically be an infinite amount of arguments that you could generate for veganism, right? So let's see, what's the best way to explain this? Okay, well, I'll talk about ethics for a second. I don't want to get too many words on the table that might be like, unfamiliar for some people. But what philosophers will usually talk about, if they're talking about ethics, is 3 tiers, 3 sort of levels that you can talk about ethics on. So the sort of highest, most abstract level is meta-ethics. That's where you're talking about the nature of morality. So if you're asking questions like, do moral facts exist? What exactly is a moral fact? Is it something objective? Is it something subjective? Is it something mind-dependent, mind-independent? Those kind of weird, abstract questions about the nature of morality, those fall into the category of meta-ethics. There's a second level called normative ethics. That's where we're going to talk about what we consider goodness to be. So most people would probably have at some point heard the word utilitarianism. So that's like a normative system where we say that what is morally good is what generates utility, and utility is typically defined as something along the lines of that which maximizes well-being and reduces suffering. There's other normative systems like deontology. If you know any religious people tend to be deontologists. Deontology doesn't emphasize maximizing utility or well-being. It instead emphasizes respecting rights. So a deontological case for veganism might say, so like if you guys know someone like Gary Francione, he would be like closer to a deontological vegan. Someone like Peter Singer, if you know him, he'd be more like a more utilitarian kind of vegan. Now, a deontologist might say animals just have certain rights and it's wrong to violate those rights. They wouldn't talk about harm reduction, they talk about the rights. A utilitarian would say, well, what we want to do is maximize well-being. Killing the animals and torturing them obviously doesn't achieve that, so, we would want to be vegan. There's other systems like virtue ethics where this is to do with the character of the actor. So, maybe killing an animal isn't wrong because it violates rights. It's not wrong because it causes suffering. It's wrong because of the type of person that you are. So that's normative ethics. And then applied ethics is sort of the easiest of the 3 levels to understand. That's when you're talking about actual real-world problems. So when Gabe's talking about political issues, right? Politics, that's going to be applied ethics. Veganism, that's applied ethics. If you're talking about abortion, trans issues, whatever the thing is, all of those count as applied issues. So the reason why I lay out all the sort of the 3 tiers of ethics and the different philosophical positions there, some of them, is just to show what an array, the huge array of places that people could be coming from ethically, right? And most people haven't actually thought in any kind of serious way about ethics, so they don't even really know where they fall with respect to a lot of these different positions within ethics. Also, could I have some water? Is that okay? I'd really appreciate that, thank you. Yeah, so back to the question of how to create sort of a good ethical case for veganism. Well, you could argue from within some of those frameworks, right? You could choose to make the utilitarian case, you could choose to make a deontological case, you could choose to make a case that appeals to subjectivists or objectivists, but to me, I want to make a case that requires as few assumptions as possible, right? I don't want to make an argument that's only going to appeal to a subset of people. I want to make an argument that's going to work for as many people as possible. So I'll ask myself, what is the kind of commonality? What are some common aspects of how people think that they're less likely to diverge on? So one aspect that comes to mind, thank you very much, I really appreciate that. I'm just gonna take a sip. One aspect that comes to mind is logical consistency. Most people don't like contradicting themselves. For anyone who's like unclear on what a contradiction is, it is affirming some proposition and its negation. So a proposition is a sentence capable of being true, like, the sun is out, it's cloudy outside, there's a dog in front of me, speaking obviously to the dog person. Yeah, so those are all propositions. They can be true or false. Now, if you affirm a proposition and its negation, it's a contradiction, right? If I say there is and is not a dog in front of me, most people would say, well, that doesn't make sense to me. Now, philosophy is a weird place. There are some weird positions out there. There is a view, it's called dialetheism, that actually says that there is such thing as a true contradiction. But, we'll set that aside for a second. So I think just a respect for logic is a good starting point. If you can make a case that assumes logic, you're not going to lose too many people right there, in the same way that you would if you started from a position of like utilitarianism or something, where now you're only going to appeal to a subset of people. So I ask, how can we maybe build a case for veganism where the main sort of principle we're going to need here is just logical consistency? Well, I look at what people believe, right? People have ethical beliefs already, regardless of whether those beliefs are, again, objective, subjective, what exactly their framework is. They have ethical beliefs. Most people here would say something like they think it's wrong to kill an animal, right? For whatever reason that might be. If you go to the general population instead of a room full of vegans, they'll express ethical beliefs too. Most of them don't think it's okay to kill somebody for no reason. Most of them definitely don't think it's okay to kill them for the purpose of making a hamburger. I mean, if anyone does think that, then that's pretty crazy. So I think that the best way to argue for veganism, the clearest way to make an ethical case that's going to appeal to as many people as possible, is to argue from consistency. So what you would do is you'd point to the situation right now that's happening with animals, the animal holocaust. Now, a carnist may or may not say that's ethical. They might just say that they're unconvinced if it's ethical or not. But if you say, all right, let's swap those animals with humans, do you think it's ethical? You're going to get a pretty much uniform no from anyone in this society. I mean, I can't speak for everywhere else in the earth. So if we can kind of take those two starting points, if we can take their position on the animal holocaust and their position on an equivalent human holocaust, we can just ask them a question to test their logical consistency. Now, there's I mean, this is stuff that would get kind of boring to go into in detail. You can formulate all of this using systems and logic, like formal logical systems, but I'll just give you a simple way to ask this as a question. You can ask this person, referring to these two situations we've got on the table, animal and human holocaust, what is true of the animal holocaust that, if true of the human holocaust, would cause you to have the same attitude towards it? So apparently, remember, they're indifferent or approving of the animal holocaust, right? We're talking about the human holocaust, they're not. What is true of that animal holocaust that, if true of the human holocaust, would cause them to say that it's justified or to become indifferent towards it? Now, people really struggle with this question, right? They might say something like, here are some sort of common answers that people might try to generate. They might say, well, animals are less intelligent. So what would it mean to provide the answer of intelligence to that question? You're saying, okay, the thing true of the animal holocaust that, if true of the human holocaust, would justify it is the lower intelligence of animals. If we take less intelligent humans, is it okay to commit the Holocaust against them? Most people would say, no, it's not okay to slaughter the disabled. What else might someone say? They might say, well, you know, the difference is just they taste good. Okay, well, I mean, some people might already say humans taste good, but just granting that humans taste good for a second, if that were the case, would we be justified in committing a Holocaust against them? Most people would probably say no to that. You know, what other justifications do we get from Carnus? It's the social contract. Okay, if the social contract said it's okay to Holocaust people, would we say that that's all right? Again, most people say no to that. They think even in a society where the social contract says it's okay to commit mass murder, it's not actually okay by their personal ethics. You know, what other kind of justifications do we get? That it's natural. I mean, okay, you could argue that it's also natural to murder humans. They've been doing it forever, but just assuming it's natural, does that justify it? Right? So this is a really good tool that you can ask. Again, the question is just what's true of the animal situation that, if true of the human situation, would cause you to say it's justified in the same kind of way? It's a really good question you can ask that forces people to try to generate some kind of consistent basis for their ethical system. Now, most people really can't find something, and it's that inability to find something that will open their mind to veganism. So I think on that note, I was going to keep it pretty short and terse. That's my general point that I wanted to make here, is that the stable way to argue for veganism, what I think is the best way, is to argue as general a position as possible that makes as few assumptions as possible, and just to keep it simple. So what I'd like to close with is just asking you guys, if any of you have sort of common ethical arguments that you hear from Carnus that you're not sure about the answer to. If you can't think of any, that's fine. We're doing a panel thing and I can, take other questions there. What'd you say?
I get, when I do AV, I get hunters who will say that it's more ethical to shoot animals in the wild rather than go to slaughterhouses, right? And I don't know. It's they say that they need to do it as well, which I don't know. It's hard to get through to a hunter, right?
Okay, so one thing to note is that point is correct on most ethical systems. It probably, certainly on utilitarianism, it's better to go and shoot an animal that's lived a free life than to keep them confined and torture them. Now, both of those actions are morally negative, but you could grant that it's better. There's some systems that would not say it's better. Deontology might say, nope, either case is killing. There's no difference. They're both equivalently wrong. Some people might resonate with that. I don't. I think that one is better. But the question of whether it's ethical, whether it's a justification, again, just frame it into the question, right? Would you think that it's justified to slaughter a human if you go and hunt them instead of producing them in a factory? Any others? Yeah? Sure.
It's not so much of an ethical argument, but more they're entitled. Like this air of entitlement that, well, we're on top of the food chain, so they're not even concerned about ethics. They don't even consider whether it's ethical or not. I work with a couple of hunters.
Sure.
So they just have this stance, and similar to what that gentleman said, is that, well, it's better than me buying the factory farmed meat, so that's their one justification.
Sure.
And the secondary thing is they're not even considering whether what they're doing is ethical or not. They just feel entitled to it. because they have the gun.
Okay, well, one thing you said there was the food chain. So with respect to the food chain, I mean, that's a pretty easy one to answer. Like, say, again, let's just funnel it back into the question, right? What's true of animals that, if true of humans, would justify murdering them in the same way? If some humans were higher than others on the food chain, would we think that it's ethical to then just go out and murder those humans who are lower down? Most people would probably say no. I mean, what's it mean to be higher on the food chain? That you can eat others, that you have the strength to do it, right? Or even if it had been the case through our evolutionary history, that in fact some humans really did eat and prey on others. Most people would not support the implementation of some kind of like crazy caste system where we can like eat the lower humans or something. So, well, I mean, yeah, there's economic things too. Like, I mean, if you that opens a whole other can of worms, so I won't go there right now. But the question about entitlement, right? You sort of said that. Well, you did say it's not really an argument; it's more a mindset. So that kind of becomes a psychological question, and I'm not saying I have all the answers to the psychological question of how to get through to somebody. But if it were presented as an argument, right, just that I'm entitled. If you felt entitled to kill a human, someone just felt entitled to do that, again, funneling it back into the question, would it be okay? Most people would probably say, if Bob out on the street announces that he feels entitled to murder and eat you, it's probably not okay to do that, and we should probably have a society that would put him in prison for doing that.
Right.
Yeah, is that okay?
Yeah, no, that helps.
Yeah, I mean, any others? Yeah, go ahead.
When people use religion or God saying that they can't in this world for us to eat and use verses in the Bible that represent that, how do you?
Yeah, okay. Well, one way would be to ask them, okay, so you could funnel it into the question again. What is true of animals that, if true of humans, would justify murdering them for food, right? Now, if the trait being offered here, if the reason for doing this is, God says so. If God told you that it was ethical to just genocide humans, would that actually make it ethical? Now, most people, if they hear that, are going to say, that would sound pretty wacky to me. But there are religious people who actually would bite the bullet on that and say, if God says it, then it becomes ethical. Now, I guess a lot of you have dealt with that. Now, there's a further question you can actually ask, because there's also sometimes religious people will tell you that's an incoherent question because it's impossible for God to say that it's okay to murder humans. That's against his nature. So I can't even conceptualize what you're talking about. It's a contradiction in my mind. So you can slightly reframe the question in that case, and you can say, okay, so if we have humans, we have animals, we have humans. Sorry, let me just think for 1 second about how to phrase this most easily. Yeah, you could say, well, actually, you could ask it in the same kind of way. So you could say, what is true of the animal that, if true of the human, would cause it, would make it ethical to murder the human in question? Now, they obviously hold the position that God doesn't say it's okay to murder humans. Some of them will say that's actually contradictory. But, I mean, apparently God says it is okay to murder the animals. So there must actually be something true of the animals that, if true of the humans, would justify it. Now, that quality might actually require such modification of the humans that they aren't human anymore, but you'd still want to hear the religious person actually spell out that quality. But I will say, with religious people, religion can be a massive sticking point. There's people who will just buckle right down on religion. They'll just say, you know what? Like, God says it's okay. I don't care how crazy you can make my worldview seem. I don't care if you can make all these atheists sit here and go, yeah, this guy thinks it's okay to like genocide the planet if God says so. Someone might just full commit to that and just say, I don't care, God says so. And honestly, I don't really know what to do at that point with those people except just argue with them about their God stuff. I'll get to you next. I mean, you could ask, I think at that point, you might honestly need to move into talking about religion and just ask them for a justification for their religious beliefs, if that's what they're grounding it all out in. So the reason there is that a consistency test is only going to work with people who aren't going to buckle down and hard commit to these kind of positions, right? So most people, when they realize that what they're saying would justify killing a bunch of people, will back off of it. But if someone buckles down hard, then you're going to have to do further exploration. So here's another way that I could put this. Most of you have probably tried talking to Carnists at some point, and you'll have them try to push the conversation into gray areas where you're not as able to make the case. Most of us probably think that it's easier to make the case that it's wrong to stab a cow in the throat than it is to make the case that we should have some moral consideration for insects, or that animal testing should be outlawed, because something like animal testing, it seems more justified. I mean, we can all grant it's not justified, but it seems more justified than just killing something for a hamburger. You can say, you know, it's for research or something like this. Now, my general rule when I talk to Carnists, I'm not going to sit there and talk about some gray area when we haven't covered a simple area, right? If they don't understand it's wrong to stab a cow in the throat, I'm not going to be talking to them about what level of moral consideration we should have for insects. Now, with respect to the people who buckle down and bite the bullet, they stay consistent despite the fact that it's going to cause their position to justify genocide, which might be what you're dealing with certain people who really hard commit on the religious stuff. That's the same kind of situation as when you're trying to talk to someone when someone's trying to talk to you about insect rights who's not on board with, who doesn't understand that it's wrong to stab a cow in the throat. If the person doesn't understand that it's wrong to genocide billions of people, they definitely aren't ready to comprehend something like veganism, right? So I think with someone like that, you'd actually want to step back a bit, get out of the veganism conversation, and convince that person of basic human rights. And that might Yeah, so I hope that's an okay answer. I just want to feel like I've fully addressed it. So the only qualm there is that that's a slightly different one, because that's a case with religious people where they might actually like hard commit to the consistent but crazy position. When someone does that, that's when the veganism conversation basically ends, and there's more simple things that you'd have to convince them of. Then if you can get them on board with basic human rights, then you can run the consistency question again and get them to veganism. That's the best answer I can give. I will get to you guys. Gabe was first. What do you want to ask?
Yeah, I was going to point out that I don't know about all religions, but the big three Bibles, Old Testament, New Testament, Quran, all support genocide, rape, murder, and slavery, and animal sacrifice. So I don't have religion, but when I talk to religious people, I don't bother trying to convince them to stop being religious. That's its own argument. But I just simply ask them, I point out the verses in the Bible, because a lot of religious people have not read their own Bible, cover to cover, and I have. And you can easily Google rape in the Bible, slavery in the Bible, genocide in the Bible, and find the quotes, right?
Yep.
So I just asked them, do you think God here said that rape victims should marry the rapist? Do you think that's what should happen or not? And then that's when they're going to be like, oh, well, he didn't really mean that, or it was written by humans. Oh, okay, well, if he didn't really mean that, well, maybe he didn't really mean you should sacrifice animals for no reason. And maybe that part was written by humans. Well, maybe the part about stabbing animals is also written by humans, you know? They're going to be, you know...
Yeah, now I think the reason that we're answering that a little differently is because you're thinking from an angle of how best to persuade someone, and I'm thinking more about sort of the logic of the thing. So what you're talking about there is arguing from within their religion. So you're just going to grant that their God exists for the sake of argument, then try to argue from within their religion. I mean, one way to do this would be to try to point to the other verses that seem not to support killing animals. Another way would be to, leave the God thing on the table, but maybe we can start pushing on the notion that this is a perfect translation of his will by pointing to some particularly egregious parts and asking, are you really on board with this? So yeah, I'm fine with that as a strategy. But just from the angle I'm talking about with consistency, I mean, the first thing would be, would you in fact slaughter the humans if God says so? If they do hard commit to that, then logically speaking, all I'm saying at that point is that the religion thing is what you'd have to, that's the thing that's generating the problem. That's what's making them comfortable hard committing to the crazy position. But no, I fully agree with what you're saying. That's a fine approach, yeah. One particularly funny debate I saw once, Christopher Hitchens, if any of you guys know him, he was debating some Christian apologist, I don't remember, it might have been Frank Turek, but at one point, Hitchens just asked him, you know, God commanded that we slaughter the Amalekites. If there were Amalekites alive today, would you support genociding them? And eventually the guy committed to it and said yes. So, yeah, religion's not great. Okay, yeah, what's going next? Yeah, sure.
So you're talking about moral consistency, right?
Yeah, just logical consistency, but yeah, in the domain of morality.
Okay.
So I'm just going to stop there, guys. Oh, sorry, in the middle of the question. Peter, when you're done, we're going to stop and do our question period at the end, but you go ahead, Peter.
Thank you.
Cool.
So I can remember when I was a teenager and was starting to think about becoming vegetarian and later vegan, that I raised issues to my friends, and I said, you know, you're concerned about humans, and some of them were religious. Leave that aside for a moment. I said, well, what about the chicken? What about the cow and everything? And they simply said, like, chicken doesn't count.
Yeah.
And so they were really saying they are not morally equivalent to humans.
Right.
And I think I find certainly when I do get into more in-depth arguments with people at a CUBE, for example, or somewhere else, is that they typically will say, you're equating something that should not be equated. That people and other animals are not morally equivalent. Basically, the chicken doesn't count. It's the same argument that I heard when I was a kid. How would you answer that, or how does that?
Well, the first thing I would do is actually grant that they're not morally equivalent, because it can be the case that they're not morally equivalent, and still not the case that it's okay to slaughter either, right? You could have, you know, here's the line where it's okay, below which it's okay to slaughter something. You can have two things that are above that line that aren't equivalent, right? But they're still above the line. So I would grant that they're not equivalent. I mean, what it seems like to me, from my perspective, what I care about is well-being. I care about maximizing well-being. I care about reducing suffering. And I'm going to have more moral consideration for a being depending on the degree to which it's capable of manifesting suffering and well-being. So this is why I'm going to care about a human more than I'm going to care about a fly. Now, most people, you know, you'll get pushback from vegans when you compare a human and a cow, right? Because it seems close enough. But once you go to a fly, people tend to notice that there really is something weird about saying if you have to kill one or the other, you should flip a coin. We can kind of notice, you know, if what we're concerned with is well-being, the human is going to just have vastly more well-being than the fly. The fly has a far shorter lifespan. It can't have the kind of brain states we have thinking about love or like the nature of the universe. It's just the human's life, if what we care about is well-being, is more meaningful. So how would I respond to that? I'd probably grant that there's a difference, but I would just funnel it into the question, right? So what I would want to ask is I'd want to ask, what is it that's true of animals that if it were true of humans would cause their value to become sufficiently low that it would be okay to slaughter them for a hamburger? Just have to see how they reply to that. Is that an okay answer for you? Okay, awesome. Great.
Okay, they were all amazing. I think we all have to. Thanks, guys. So I don't know. You have to go?
What time is it? No, I think.
Okay. Well, we all three speakers will be available until Gabe has to go. Then it's down to 2 on a panel to take your questions. While we set that up, though, there is an opportunity to have your voice heard on some pressing Canadian bills, which are in danger of dying on the order paper and needing to go back to square one if they're not passed before Parliament rises for summer recess on June 21st. Schumann is of Compassion on the Streets, is going to walk us through the simple steps we need to take to weigh in and make positive changes for animals in the political arena.
Thanks.
Some great speakers tonight. It's great. But we all have homework, right? We all can do something. We need to go home and we need to actively participate in animal suffering, right? What can we do as a group collectively? So the reason we bring this up is because it's a federal election year, some of you heard, and we need to raise our voice, right? We've got only until October. Federal elections up in October. everything gets reset. We've got some important bills to address. So I just wanted to talk about 5 bills that we need to really focus on. And I've included some links here, some links like some of the petitions, the e-petitions that you can participate in. You've got some email petitions that you can send to your MP. How to contact, does everyone know how to contact their MP? Does anyone know who their MP is?